How far will it go? Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates leading a group of 7 nations severing ties with Qatar officially for sponsoring terrorism. Everything from the Muslim Brotherhood and ISIS to militants supported by Iran in Saudi Arabia's restive eastern province. Critics call it a pretext and payback for the tiny emirate's global ambitions, which include Al Jazeera television, an open door to Iran, and support for a Muslim Brotherhood that's banned as a terror group in Egypt. When we ask why now, many wonder if Donald Trump's Iran bashing and gushing praise of Saudi Arabia during his visit 2 weeks ago to the peninsula perhaps didn't inadvertently come across as a green light to tighten the screws. You can judge for yourself when we queue up his latest tweets. But both the United States and France are uneasy. They enjoy strong business and military ties with both sides in this argument. How do they play this one? And more broadly, who are the West's friends in the fight against terror? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking how far the Qatar row will go. With us from New York, Firas Maksa, director of the Arabia Foundation. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
From New York, Antoine Half, senior research scholar at Columbia University's Center on Global Energy Policy. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure as well.
From Rome, journalist Rula Jabril. She teaches at the American University of Rome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And attorney and columnist Ardavan Amir Aslani, the author of Saudi Arabia from Influence to a Decadence.
Thank you for having me.
It's not a flattering profile of Saudi Arabia.
No.
Okay.
It's the reality of Saudi Arabia.
All right, we're going to be talking about the France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. It's a tiny nation of 2.6 million residents. We say residents because there are only 300,000 Qatari citizens. So when neighboring Saudi Arabia closes the border and the airspace, the impact is immediate. Now, this tweet shows Qatar Airways flight paths this Tuesday, and it has been havoc in the skies for travelers. More on the sudden chaos that's ensued just 24 hours in with our own Emerald Maxwell.
Rains at Doha International Airport. Since Tuesday morning, all air traffic has been cancelled between this major transport hub and the other Gulf countries and Egypt. It follows their decision to cut diplomatic ties with Doha, accusing it of supporting terrorism in the region. Several Gulf carriers have announced a suspension of all flights to and from Qatar. In turn, Qatar Airways has decided to suspend its links with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt. But the crisis is also on land. Saudi Arabia closed its land border with Qatar on Monday, effectively blocking food and other exports, and prompting Qataris to rush to supermarkets to stock up. Now facing food shortages, Doha must find alternative ways to import its goods. Aside from hydrocarbons, the country buys all of its raw materials abroad, as well as 90% of its food products, worth more than $1 billion in 2015. Qatar will, however, continue to export its liquefied natural gas, thanks to its recently expanded port infrastructure. Nonetheless, Qatar will have to pay more to borrow. Bad news for a country currently preparing to host the 2022 Football World Cup.
Antoine Half, how long can Qatar hold out if this blockade continues?
Well, you know, what's really striking is the lack of market reaction to this news. Qatar is a member of OPEC. It's an oil supplier. It's mostly a very significant LNG supplier. And yet markets are pretty quiet today.
Pretty quiet, but the price of crude has gone below $50 a barrel.
Below. Yes. Surprisingly, there's been initially a downward response in the oil price. You know, if the market had been tight and the market had been concerned about this, there would have been an upward movement in oil prices. We've seen the price dip yesterday. Today, the price is slightly up, but just marginally.
What does that tell you?
It suggests that the market is really not concerned. It suggests that the market is not concerned. The market, you know, has been looking for a stronger OPEC price management policy than OPEC has provided so far. Has been looking for deeper cuts and longer cuts. And I think the market initially has been concerned that perhaps with this spat in the GCC countries, OPEC discipline would unravel. That would play against the strict enforcement and compliance with the cuts by the member countries.
And is that discipline going to unravel? Because on the one hand, there's the discipline of OPEC members. And remember, Saudi Arabia and Iran are on opposite sides of this, yet they have agreed to tighten production together. Or is it now all going to come undone?
I don't think it's going to have an impact on compliance. Compliance, in my view, was doubtful to begin with. I know the general view is compliance has been very strong, but in fact, exports have been extremely high, including from both OPEC countries and non-OPEC countries, which have been nominally part of the supply cut agreement. The Saudis are the real, the major driver of OPEC policy and the major contributor to the cuts, and I don't think they're going to change their policy because of this dispute.
So which brings us back to our original question, which is how long can Qatar hold out?
Well, what we are seeing is some effect, and we're likely to see some effect on physical shipments, because most of Qatari crude shipments are commingled, are co-loaded with typically with crude from Saudi Arabia. And now this way of moving the crude out to customers can no longer happen. And Qatari crude has either to go on single smaller tankers at a higher cost or be co-loaded with crude from Iraq, from Iran, from Oman. And that's less likely and it's going to be more costly.
All right, so Qatar feeling the pinch immediately. Firas Maksad, did you see this coming? Why suddenly this blockade of Qatar?
I mean, there's two ways to view this. One is to say that this came out of nowhere. Nobody saw it coming. On the other hand, is to argue that it's been a long way coming. This is not the first time that Qatar suffers a diplomatic setback with its Gulf and Arab neighbors. We had a fallout in 2014 in which ambassadors were recalled, and we also had a fallout in 2002. In fact, most analysts who follow the region would argue that the catalyst for all this was all the way back in 1995, when the former emir was overthrown. The emir of Qatar was overthrown by a coup d'etat carried out by his own son. It was since then that this small Gulf country has been trying to play an outsized role for itself, to carve out an outsized role for itself, and doing so by literally sort of feeding both sides of conflicts around the Middle East. The latest of which was reported yesterday in the Financial Times. Qatar reportedly paid $1 billion to secure the release of royal family members who were kidnapped in Iraq. They paid that money to Iran and to Shia militias. But then they also turned around and paid $300 million to Al-Qaeda-related affiliates in the war in Syria. So literally here we see Qatar fueling both sides of conflicts, whether it's in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, and in other places.
Qatar fueling both sides. Is this the way to go about it, though, cutting suddenly diplomatic ties?
Well, arguably this was the move of last resort, because there has been a history, as I just mentioned. In fact, when Muammar al-Qaddafi of Libya was overthrown in 2011 and all the state intelligence caches came out to the open, it was then revealed that the Emir of Qatar discussed overthrowing the Saudi royal family and supporting Saudi opposition members. In 2011, Saudi Arabia under King Abdullah at the time did not react to that. In fact, they exercised quite a bit of patience. So there's a long track record, and I think this is just the latest manifestation of these recurring crises.
Rula Jibril, how do you explain what's happened?
I mean, I heard your last guest saying that there's evidence against Qatar of financing terrorism. And these evidence, according even to the President of the United States, come from the chief financiers of terrorism itself, Saudi Arabia. According to every agencies, the security agency, Saudi Arabia not only gave us Wahhabism, not only gave the ideology and the theology behind Al-Qaeda and ISIS, every radical group. Until recently, they've been financing every jihadist group around the globe. So to say that Qatar is financing jihadists, it's like my mother telling me that I'm black and she's She's even, more brown than me. It's preposterous. It's also ridiculous because Qatar is part of the coalition that is the Sunni countries that are bombing today, as we speak, Yemen and Syria. But Qatar has a different approach to the issues in the larger Middle East. For example, they don't approve of tyrants and dictator Sisi. They don't approve of what's happening to the Palestinians in the occupied territories. They don't approve of many of the practices, and they're willing and open eventually to negotiate with Iran. So all these hardcore evidence coming from Saudi Arabia, the country that gave us 15 of the 19 hijackers of 9/11, is honestly a joke if it's not a tragic comedy. There's
So
a
how do you
vacuum of
explain?
power
How do you
in the
explain why?
United States.
How do you explain why this is coming to a head
I am happy to
now?
explain it to you if you give me the chance.
Sure.
It's very easy. What's happening is the President of the United States a month ago actually, visited the region. Then he said that he has some kind of armed deal for $110 billion, which is a fake news. It's a lie. He never had that. Both the Hill in the United States and security agencies said that there's no deal. However, the Saudis were smart enough, together with the Emiratis, to shore up the support against Iran. And they want to exercise the power. If you watch Game of Thrones, there's a sentence where people are debating when the king is dead, what is happening after the king is dead. And one of them is saying, the owner of a brothel, actually, in that case, he's saying, chaos is a ladder. It's an opportunity. And what's happening in the region, because America is absent and there's no leadership, this is an opportunity to exercise and exert their power and basically shape the Middle East in one direction. And that direction is the Saudi and the Emirati direction, who wants to bully everybody into submission. Qatar is not perfect. But for the Saudis to say that Qatar financed terrorism, when you go to Raqqa, the capital of ISIS, and you watch what they're practicing, it's Saudi actually state religion, and they are selling books that are written in Saudi Arabia.
Right.
I mean, look, I understand for Europe, especially for the UK, that sell 3 billion euros every year in terms of armaments to the Saudi regime. But then on the other hand, our hypocrisy, when then the Foreign Office has a report about financial connections, and we don't put out that report because we are concerned to hurt the sensibilities of the Saudis, then we have to re-examine our policies.
All right. You mentioned the U.S.
Francois,
president.
can I jump in here just for a minute? Because she referred to me when she began her remarks. First, I surely hope that Rilla is not insinuating that there's anything negative about being brown or black. I didn't get the connection there. But then again, I also want to say that all the evidence there about Qatar financing terrorism.
So don't throw at me things.
All the evidence that's there is not put forward just by Saudi Arabia.
The connection is very simple. For Saudi Arabia to say Qatar is financing terrorism is preposterous.
The FT article yesterday, and I think we could all attest to the credibility of the Financial Times yesterday, about the $1 billion in ransom money that was paid by Qatar both to Shia militant group and also Sunni militant groups throughout the region. This is not evidence that's manufactured by Saudi Arabia. The intelligence file of the Libyan state that were revealed are also not evidence that are manufactured by Saudi Arabia. In fact, this showdown is being misrepresented as a showdown between Qatar on one hand and Saudi Arabia on the other. That's not the case. In fact, probably Egypt and the UAE have been leading the effort, both because they feel pretty strongly that Qatar is interfering in their own domestic affairs. So let's make sure that we don't cast this situation in the wrong fashion, and we also don't play around with the evidence, which in fact is coming from many places, not just Saudi Arabia.
Let me jump in here because I will contradict you. So the Muslim Brotherhood, who won the election in Egypt and were ousted by a thug and a tyrant called Sisi, couldn't lead the effort because guess what? Sisi is paid by Saudi Arabia and by the Emiratis, who want to crush that democratic movement. This is on one hand. The Emiratis, and you can read those in the leaked email that were leaked from the ambassador, who is shoring up support against Qatar. And basically, they actually helped Donald Trump in America through Mohammed bin Zayed meet Putin and his men in the islands, in the Azora Islands.
All right,
What I am saying, basically, both sides are guilty of financing extremism. This is not about extremism. This is not about the war on terror. This is actually about punishing Qatar for having different views than the Emiratis and the Saudis. They basically, what they want Qatar to be a client state or some kind of submissive state. This is not about terrorism.
Firas
Otherwise,
Maksad, Rula Jibril,
Saudi
we'll pick up
Arabia
on these points.
We're going to
pick up on these points
because this is important. We would not have Bin Laden or Ayman Zawahiri or any of these terrorists if it wasn't for Saudi Arabia and the Emiratis.
All right, the U.S. president contradicting more neutral public pronouncements from his own Secretary of State this Tuesday. Donald Trump tweeting, during my recent trip to the Middle East, I stated there can no longer be funding of radical ideology. Leaders pointed to Qatar. Look, exclamation point. That was one tweet early this morning. And then there was more. Here we see Donald Trump firing off two tweets. So good to see the Saudi Arabia visit with the king in 50 countries already paying off. They said they would take a hard line on funding extremism, and all reference was pointing to Qatar. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end of the horror of terrorism. Now, I should say, and this is why I'm a little confused, Ardavan Amir Aslani, the Pentagon has since reacted. And the Pentagon has basically said that praising Qatar for hosting U.S. forces and for enduring commitment to regional security. And the Pentagon spokesperson refusing to comment on Donald Trump's tweets. We're speaking on the day where it's the start of the offensive to retake Raqqa, with U.S. planes flying from Qatar.
Flying out of Al Udeid Air Base, which is the largest U.S. air base besides Diego Garcia abroad. And all the flights into Syria take off from Qatar. You know, the young lady mentioned the fact, and I think it is important for us to stress this, accusing Qatar of terrorism by Saudi Arabia, it's like the pot mocking the kettle. It is beyond doubt, and honestly speaking, anyone who has this much of dignity cannot discard this fact that the entire ideology behind the terrorist movements that we're witnessing today comes out of the Salafi Wahhabi version of Saudi Arabia.
What's it about?
I'll tell you. And this is a fact, as well as the financing, which the Saudis acknowledge, just saying it's not the state, it's a civil society, as if there's a civil society in Saudi Arabia. Now the cause.
It's not true.
Now the cause. The cause, what is the
If I can
cause?
jump in,
When
no.
you look at the
I think that-
situation over here, you're looking at two different schools of thought fighting against each other. The Saudis promoting their version of Salafi Islam, and the Qataris defending the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, this is a huge problem for the Saudis and for the other petromonarchies of the Persian Gulf. Why? Because the Muslim Brotherhood is a movement where legitimacy of governance comes from the bottom up, where you have elections, when you have the people consenting to be ruled by those who rule over you. While as the Salafi Wahhabi version, those that are defended by Saudi Arabia, is a feudal structure whereby the structure of power is such that generosity coming from the government down brings legitimacy to the Sheikh.
Ardavan, we have to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.